Time now for tonight's Power Panel. It's extra large. We've got a lot of great people. Co-host of the 5 right here on Fox News, Juan Williams, former press secretary for the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, Rochelle Ritchie, and Fox News contributors Lawrence Jones and Katie Pavlich here with me in Washington. Good to see you all.
Good to see you.
Rochelle, I want to start with you. What caught my eye, among other things, the Daily Caller tweeted out today, if you're a Virginia Democrat and you have not worn blackface, please contact us. What is going on with your party?
You know, I think it's really unfortunate, Ed, but, you know, I think this lends to a bigger conversation. Obviously, when I saw the blackface and the Ku Klux Klan robe, I was very disturbed by it. But I think that this is a result of this country really not doing a better job at educating people on black history. And so I think that a lot of people have really become very insensitive, and they've had insensitive conversations as far as black history and what is offensive to black people in this country. And so because of the lack of education when it comes to African-American history, there has not been this sort of, we have not learned enough about black people. When you hear about black history, you know, we were slaves, we were freed by Lincoln, civil rights, and then Obama became president. And so it seems like that is pretty much how wide it goes. And so I think that we really need to do a better job at educating people so that these kind of things do not happen in the future. Okay, well, I want to bring in Katie, though, because you make a fair point. But on the other hand, Katie, haven't Democrats made this worse instead of better, perhaps, by like some of the ads that ran in the Virginia governor's race that accused Ed Gillespie, the Republican, and President Trump of being racist, and a guy in a pickup truck with a Confederate flag trying to run down minority kids. How did that help the conversation about black history?
Well, look, I do think that there is an argument to be made about having real conversations without the judgment about people being ignorant about maybe some of the things. But in Virginia, in the capital of the Confederacy, I don't think that Ralph Northam or any of these other Democrats who are now admitting they were, and then, you know, saying that they're not admitting to it, as Northam has, are necessarily deserve the benefit of the doubt when it comes to what was offensive. But when it comes to the double standard here, you know, Ralph Northam ran, or people on his behalf, and he refused to condemn, ads against Republicans, accusing them of racism falsely. The left in this situation has set themselves up about whether they want to follow the new rules that they have set in terms of identity politics and using race as a weapon. I think that there's room for forgiveness here. I think that you can look at it from a perspective of they've all apologized, maybe with the exception of Ralph Northam because he admitted it and then essentially lied about it. But that has to go on both sides. And the left can't continue to falsely accuse Republicans of racism to shut down debate and to win an argument with that, and rather than having us move forward with fair points.
Let's bring in Juan, because Juan, you and I have had long dinners and talked about race and other serious subjects, and we should have a serious conversation about this, not just a food fight. When you hear the points being made by Katie and Rochelle, what goes through your mind?
Well, one, I think this is, you know, clearly beyond sensitivities of black people. I think that there's a long history of blackface being used to demean, to dehumanize black Americans, and it goes back, you know, it's even before the Civil War, but certainly afterwards, the whole minstrel ideology. The second thing I would say here is I'm listening to Katie. I think, you know, there's a lot of sense on the Republican side of, oh, you guys have stepped in the mess that you made in terms of hypocrisy. And so I guess there's a little bit of schadenfreude in saying, oh, you're suffering from this issue now. To me, it's a little bigger. I think that for Democrats right now to deal with someone like Ralph Northam, you have to understand, as Katie said, he has changed his position on this. He has sacrificed all moral authority by first saying, oh, that's not me, and or apologizing, and then subsequently saying that's not me. At this point, the argument is, oh, if he gets out, it will mark him as a racist former governor for life, rather than dealing with the real issue, which is his need to apologize, to deal with moral authority, and the fact that he's damaging the Democrats nationally in the era of Trump, when there's lots of accusations about racism, misogyny. Well, now the Democrats look like they're just open to charges of hypocrisy.
All right, I gave Juan a lot of time. Lawrence, you said bingo.
Yeah, I can't believe this hell is frozen over. I agree with my brother Juan, and this is why I've been telling Republicans to calm down. Allow them to keep these people in office, because we know what's going to happen in 2020. They're going to be accusing Donald Trump of racism, say the Republicans are racist, just like they do in every other election. The Democrats started this whole mob mentality of calling people out and not allowing due process to happen. And so now you have to deal with the people that are in your party. And this is what I've always told people from the very beginning. There is no party that owns racism. There's going to be people in every single party that is going to do things that we don't like, and we should all call them out. The problem is with Democrats, if they've tried to say it's just the Republicans. It's only the Republicans that are, and they use it during every single election, and now it's coming to bite their tail.
Well, and they've made that accusation without evidence as a way to not have deeper discussions about the way that policies affect.
And just throw around the word "you're a racist."
They throw it away to stop. They throw it out there to stop debate rather than having, quote, a real conversation about the issue. And the problem in Virginia is they have repeatedly accused Republicans with zero evidence of racism, and they themselves have very clear evidence of racism, whether it was
Rochelle,
now or 30 years ago.
You've been patient, Rochelle. Go ahead.
Ed, this is the problem that I have with this. See, racism is defined differently by people. So because we saw Northam in a blackface or in possibly a Ku Klux Klan robe, we've been able to see evidence of racism because of something we've seen. There are times where your rhetoric can also be racist. And it's unfortunate that in this country, unless you're in blackface, unless you're in a Ku Klux Klan robe, and unless you use the N-word, you can escape being considered a racist because it's not that clear evidence that I think people want to see when someone is labeled racist.
Okay, let me turn the conversation now to another thing that was alluded to about due process, which is another serious issue, Me Too and all the rest. Juan, when I see what's developed tonight with Congressman Bobby Scott, I wonder, in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, you had Dianne Feinstein sit on an allegation of sexual assault for months. Republicans said it was because she was holding it for maximum political benefit. She said it couldn't be corroborated. We can debate that. Now you move forward to this one with the lieutenant governor who's a Democrat in Virginia. It turns out a Democratic congressman, Bobby Scott, knew about this a year ago. Why didn't he come forward? If Democrats are saying believe all women, why didn't he come forward?
According to Bobby Scott, he didn't realize that there was sexual assault involved, but he admitted today that he knew the woman had come to him and he was fully aware of it. And so subsequent to that, I think, kind of Monday morning quarterbacking it, I think everybody would say you should have acted. Now, in the other case, by the way, that woman in the Kavanaugh case had gone to a congresswoman in California, and she was the one who sat on it before then forwarding it to the senator in the course of the judiciary.
But then Feinstein was the top Democrat on judiciary.
Correct.
Done
so that's
sooner.
a different dynamic, and I would also add a different dynamic in terms of the Washington Post knowing about the case involving this woman who's making the charges against Lieutenant Governor Fairfax. There was no really investigation of the woman in the Kavanaugh case.
All right, Lawrence and Katie, quickly make your points.
Well, I think the bottom line is this, that it seems like the Democrats, when it comes to their guys, they want due process. They want the facts to come out. They want a little bit of grace until they've worked so hard for women or worked so hard for civil rights. But when it happens to people that are on the right, they rush to judgment. They're quick to go to the press. And I'll say this, too. The press was so, when it came to Kavanaugh, they wanted investigative reporting. There must be other women. They're not doing the same thing in this situation. So this shows you the hypocrisy.
I would just show you that this is the dangers of identity politics and using things like sexual assault in a political way, because instead of judging people based on the facts and going through due process, we're having this conversation in the public arena where we don't know all the facts. We're just going based off of accusations from either side. You shouldn't believe someone as a woman any more than you believe them as a man. You should believe them based on what the evidence shows, because in America, that's the way that people can get justice. When you start lumping in, we're going to believe so-and-so over so-and-so based on gender or race, then it really conflates.
Rochelle, I'll give you the final word.
Really quickly, yes. I don't think that we should certainly be using sexual assault victims as political pawns, and I think we saw that with Dr. Ford, and I think we're seeing that now with this woman that is accusing Lieutenant Governor Fairfax. Okay.
Serious issues to tackle. We appreciate this intelligence conversation tonight. Juan, Rochelle, Lawrence, Katie, all great stuff. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Listen, I'm shocked and incredibly disappointed. This has been an awful week for Virginia, but I'm just getting the original report.
I think it's interesting that for a long time people tried to pose this or prop this up as a Republican issue, and we're finding out today it's a human issue. And it's unfortunate that we're finding this out so late in the game, but it's obviously an important issue, and I hope that people figure out how to do the right thing as soon as possible.
Well, that's Democratic Senator Mark Warner and Republican Senator Tim Scott reacting to the latest revelations from Virginia, and they keep on coming. While Governor Ralph Northam ponders whether to step down, the woman who alleges Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, Northam's potential successor, sexually assaulted her has now come forward. And the next in line to become governor, Attorney General Mark Herring, admits he wore blackface in college. Time to bring in our panel to sort this all out. Jason Riley from the Wall Street Journal and the Manhattan Institute, Mara Liasson of National Public Radio, and national security analyst Morgan Ortegas. Jason, what on earth is going on in Virginia?
Well, I think what surprised a lot of people, Chris, is not only how commonplace this sort of behavior seems to have been.
You're talking about the blackface.
Yes, but how recently it was still so commonplace, at least in certain parts of the country and in certain social circles. But I'd like to reiterate something Senator Scott said here. What we also see playing out is a cautionary tale in politicizing racism. This is not a partisan issue. Neither party is unblemished here, but you had Democrats in recent years try and pretend that Republicans have a monopoly on racial prejudice. The reality is that, Congressman Steve King's views on race are no more representative of all Republicans than the Virginia governor's views are of all Democrats, and we should acknowledge that.
Let's take a look at the line of succession in Virginia, because this gets really interesting, and again, you need a program to follow all of this. If Ralph Northam were to resign because of wearing blackface back in the 80s, his successor would be Lieutenant Governor Fairfax. If he resigns because of allegations of sexual assault, his successor is Attorney General Herring. But if he resigns because of wearing blackface, the new governor will be House Speaker Kirk Cox. All those top three, as you can see, are Democrats. Cox is a Republican. Mara, what makes this even more interesting is the reason that Cox is the Speaker in the first place is because in the 2017 election, there was the last district was decided it was a flat-footed tie, equal number of votes, so they picked a name of one of the two candidates out of a bowl. It turned out to be the Republican rather than the Democrat. That gave the majority to the Republicans, so potentially the next governor of Virginia, Cox,
would be a Republican.
Would be a Republican, and then by the benefit of picking a name out of a bowl.
Out of a bowl, and with the benefit of having 3 Democrats ahead of him fall like dominoes. I mean, if you took this storyline to a publisher, they would say, this is ridiculous, why don't you write it again? I mean, I think it's just extraordinary. And that's why there's now talk about Ralph Northam is thinking about becoming an independent and keeping his job that way, because the entire Democratic Party in Virginia, of course, wants him to step down. He might end up keeping his job because of all of this mishigas.
I
don't know what else you can call it.
Phrase. Morgan, let me pick up on that, because it was easy enough for Democrats to kick out or push out a Democrat because another Democrat was going to inherit the role. But this potentially could be kicking out a Democrat so a Republican ends up taking control of a very key state and what could be a big state in the 2020 election. Could you see that making some Democrats maybe backtrack on wanting to force Northam out?
It shouldn't, right? This shouldn't be a political decision at this point. I know that all of it's politics, but the problem here is that we are in the middle of a very nasty and contentious national discussion still on race, but also on the Me Too movement. I mean, you're looking at what the lieutenant governor is accused of. If we apply the standards that the Democrat Party set out for Kavanaugh and for others, I mean, look at, the senator who had to step down from that last year. If we apply that standard, then just merely the accusation means that you must remove yourself from the office. I don't apply that standard, but I think as we look at what we're doing, this conversation that we're having on race and that we're having on the Me Too movement, we haven't really solidified all of this as a nation because it got political and because people started using it to the gain of their political party instead of sort of figuring out where we are.
Let me stew up the pot a little bit more in all of this, Jason, because it isn't just race. It isn't even just the Me Too movement. Remember, this all started with Ralph Northam and his comments on late-term abortion. And the question I have is this just a problem for the Democratic Party in Virginia, or could this become, or is it already, a problem now for the National Democratic Party?
Well, it could be if we start setting new standards. It could go well beyond Virginia, if we're going to sort of retroactively condemn these behaviors, these poor taste attempts at humor from 30 years ago or more, we could be headed down a very slippery slope here. And I don't know that we want to do that. If the governor believes he has lost the confidence of the people of Virginia, can no longer do his job effectively, then yes, resign. But to start, you know, we all know humor doesn't age well. It's not, I mean, that's no big secret. But to start sort of, again, retroactively setting some zero tolerance policy, you're going to be roping in not only just public figures.
Are you suggesting that the governor wearing blackface back in 1984 shouldn't be grounds for him to be removed?
In and of itself, no, he's apologized. I think people are very forgiving, and I think tolerance is part of forgiving people. And you know, he said he was sorry for what he did. But I think, again, if we start applying this standard to everyone, you're not just every public figure who's ever engaged in this, you're going to be roping in entertainers, comedians, singers, all types of people in public life. And I just don't know that we want to go down that road.
Well, the Democrats have to decide what their standards are. Is it zero tolerance without any due process? Do they want to form a circular firing squad every time one of these things happens? I think the late-term abortion problem is separate. That's something that Republicans can use to paint the Democratic Party as the party of abortion up until the moment of birth. That's separate. But these other problems about race and Me Too, these are internal Democratic problems.
But real quickly, hard for Democrats to say, well, now let's take the long view of this when they were going after Republicans tooth and nail.
Well, we also saw in Florida, we saw the Secretary of State, a Republican, had to resign over this. Another state legislator in Florida, also a Republican, is dealing with this. So it goes, as Tim Scott said, it goes beyond party. We have a human issue. We need to have a national conversation on this. And this is why you don't politicize these very sensitive conversations. When you do, it comes back to bite you.
All right, panel, we have to step aside for a moment.